Picture the most beautiful building human beings have ever constructed. Now fill it with people who are terrified of a sound you make 100 times a day without thinking. Add 10,000 candles, 700 rooms, mirrors worth more than warships, gardens that swallowed a swamp, and a single rule so strange that breaking it once could end your entire life at court. That's Versailles, the centre of the civilized world and the most dangerous room in Europe, all at the same time. A place where you could watch the most powerful man on earth put on his shirt in the morning and be socially dead by evening because your fingernail was the wrong length. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists shuffling past velvet ropes, photographing the Hall of Mirrors. We're living it. One boy, inside the machine. Everything he would have seen, smelled, heard, and survived. So I make these history stories, and honestly I still have no idea whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just quietly fascinated by the fact that the grandest palace on earth had almost no toilets and an entire legal code about fingernails. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your knuckle is 1 inch from the door. 1 inch. Your hand is already curled into a fist, already rising, already committed to the most natural gesture in the world. The gesture every human being in France makes when they stand in front of a closed door. And in the half second before bone touches wood, a hand closes around your wrist so hard that the pain shoots up to your elbow. You don't cry out. You've already learned that much. You don't cry out at Versailles. The hand belongs to Monsieur Aubriot, and Monsieur Aubriot is looking at you the way a man looks at a boy who has just reached for a lit fuse. What, he says very quietly, because everything at Versailles is said very quietly, were you about to do? It isn't a question. Questions have answers. This has only consequences. Knock, you whisper. I was going to knock. Monsieur, the message is for the... You were going to knock. He says the word the way other men say words you'd get whipped for. His grip doesn't loosen. On that door, on the door of the apartments of a Duchess of the Blood, with your fist, like a bailiff, like a creditor, like a peasant hammering on a barn. You are, in fact, a peasant. You have been at Versailles for 11 days. 11 days ago you were Baptiste Collin, 15 years old, son of a Norman farrier, and the largest building you had ever stood inside was the stone church at home, which could hold perhaps 200 people if they didn't mind the smell of each other. This corridor alone could hold your entire village. Aubriot lowers your fist. He does it slowly, deliberately, the way you'd lower the hammer of a pistol. Then he holds up his own left hand in the light of the wall sconce, and he extends the little finger, and for the first time you see it properly. The nail on his left little finger is long, not claw-like, not grotesque, perhaps a 1/4 inch past the fingertip, filed smooth, curved, clean as a lady's. On his other 9 fingers the nails are trimmed down to nothing working man's nails. But this one nail has been grown, cultivated, maintained, the way a gardener maintains a single perfect espaliered pear. At Versailles, Aubriot says, nobody knocks, ever. Not on any door, not once in your life. You scratch. And he turns to the great white and gold door and he draws that single fingernail down the wood, and the sound it makes is almost nothing. A whisper of keratin on paint. A mouse behind a wainscot. A sound so soft you'd miss it entirely if you weren't listening for it. From inside the room, instantly a voice. Entree. Because they're always listening for it. Everyone in this palace, 10,000 souls, has trained their ears to catch that whisper the way a mother catches the breathing of her infant 2 rooms away. O'Brien opens the door exactly as wide as his own body, delivers the folded message into the white hand of a waiting femme de chambre, bows to precisely the depth owed to a servant of a duchess, which is different from the depth owed to the duchess, which is different from the depth owed to a princess of the blood, closes the door without letting the latch click and turns back to you. Knocking, he says, is what you do to a door when you believe the people inside are your equals or your inferiors. Fists are for equals. Knuckles are violence, boy. Small violence, but violence. A knock says, I demand. A scratch says, I exist. Barely, and only if it pleases you to notice. In this palace, everyone above you must be approached as though your existence is an imposition, and everyone is above you. He starts walking and you follow, because following O'Brien is now your entire profession. The king's own brother scratches at the king's door. The king's son scratches. Princes who own provinces, marshals who have burned cities, cardinals who speak for God. They all stand in front of a piece of painted oak and scrape at it with one fingernail like cats asking to be let in from the rain. And if they must do it, what do you think happens to a farrier's boy who pounds on a duchess's door with his fist? You don't answer. You're learning that too. He vanishes, O'Brien says, not killed. Nobody would waste a rope on you, just gone. Sent back down the road to Normandy the same afternoon, with no letter, no character, no wages, and a story that will reach your village before you do. And the man who brought him here, he touches his own chest, is diminished. Do you understand? Your fist would have cost me. Everything in this place costs somebody. You walk on through corridors that never seem to end, past doors and doors and doors, hundreds of them, white and gold, tall as trees, and you realize with the slow-crawling sensation that every single one of them is a test you can fail. 11 days ago you thought Versailles would be about gold. It's about doors. Welcome to the Chateau de Versailles in the winter of 1710. 700 rooms, 67 staircases, more than 2,000 windows, 10,000 people packed inside and around it. Royals, courtiers, guards, clerks, cooks, water carriers, chapel boys, wig makers, chair porters, the largest royal household on earth, all of it arranged in circles around one old man of 72, Louis XIV, who has been King of France for 67 years, longer than almost anyone alive can remember, and who decided half a century ago that the surest way to keep the most dangerous nobles in Europe from cutting his throat was to trap them in the most beautiful cage ever built and make them compete over fingernails. That is not an exaggeration. That is the actual system of government, and tonight you're going to live inside it. But first, you have to survive your 12th day. You sleep in a room that isn't a room. It's a section of attic under the roof of the north wing, partitioned with canvas stretched over lath, and it holds 6 straw pallets, 4 of which are occupied by boys like you, runners, sweepers, underservants of underservants, and the air up here has a taste. Cold tallow, old smoke, mouse droppings, the dust of a building that is never ever fully clean, because how could it be? And beneath all of that, faint but constant, the smell that nobody who writes poems about Versailles ever mentions, the smell of 10,000 human bodies, and not nearly enough places for them to relieve themselves. You noticed it your first hour here. You thought something had died in a wall. Then you realized it was everywhere. in the grand corridors behind the staircases in the corners of courtyards, and that nobody else seemed to notice it at all, and that this somehow was the most frightening thing yet. The most magnificent building in the world smells like the alley behind a tavern, and the people gliding through it in silk worth more than your father's forge pretend, with total success, that it doesn't. That's your first real lesson about this place, before Aubriot teaches you a single thing. Versailles runs on pretending. The whole palace is a machine for agreeing not to notice. Your hands ache when you wake. They ache every morning now, not from the work. You're a farrier's son. The work here is nothing, carrying, running, holding, but from the cold. It is the winter after the great winter, the one people still can't talk about without their voices going strange. The winter of 1709, when the sea froze at the coast and wine froze in the king's own glass at his own table, and the olive trees of Provence died standing, and people in your village ate bread made from bracken root. You survived that. Your youngest sister didn't. Nobody in France came through that winter whole, and this winter, though gentler, still gets into the palace like water into a boot. Because here is the second thing the poems don't tell you. Versailles is freezing. The rooms are too tall to heat. The fireplaces are ornaments. The windows, 2,000 of them, glory of the age, leak like sieves, and the wind off the gardens goes through the state apartments in a long, slow river of cold that makes the candle flames all lean the same direction. You dress in the dark. Rough wool stockings still damp from yesterday, breeches, 2 shirts because you've learned, the blue coat of the chateau livery, which is the single finest garment you've ever owned and which marks you to everyone who sees you as precisely what you are, property of the household, bottom rung, invisible. You rub your hands together, blow into them, feel the cracks at your knuckles sting where the cold has split the skin, and you go down the servants' stair, one of the 67 narrow and unpainted and worn into hollows by feet like yours, into the body of the machine. Aubriot is waiting for you in the room where the ushers gather off the salle des gardes, drinking something hot from a tin cup, and the first thing he does every morning before a word of greeting is take your left hand and inspect the little finger. 11 days ago there was nothing to inspect. Now there is a sliver of white beginning to show past the fingertip. A nail. Your nail. You're growing your instrument the way a soldier is issued a musket. Don't bite it, Aubriot says. Don't break it. Don't use that hand for carrying if you can use the other. A cracked nail takes a month to grow back, and an usher's boy with no scratching nail is a fiddler with no bow. Monsieur Aubriot is 51 years old and has served in the king's household for 34 of them. He is not a big man. He's narrow and dry, with a face like a folded letter, and eyes that move constantly without his head ever seeming to turn. And his hands, this is the thing you noticed first. His hands are the stillest hands you have ever seen on a living person. He never fidgets. He never drums his fingers. At Versailles, he tells you, restless hands are read like a confession. He is an huissier, an usher of the chamber, which means his entire life, his whole career. The position he guards like a dragon on gold is this. He stands at doors. He opens them for the people allowed through and remains motionless in front of the people who are not. And he knows. This is the actual skill. The thing that took 34 years. He knows exactly who is which. There are men in this palace, he tells you that morning, walking you through the cold blue dark of the state apartments before the court is awake, your 2 pairs of footsteps swallowed by the parquet. who've waited 20 years to pass through one particular door. Not because anything is behind it they need, because being seen going through it means they are someone, and there are other men who would give a year of their income to keep them out. The doors of Versailles are not architecture, boy. They are the ranks of heaven made out of oak, and we are the angels who hold them. He says it without a trace of a smile. You will learn that Aubriot says everything without a trace of a smile, and that about a third of it is none the less a joke, and that learning which third is a large part of your education. The palace wakes around you as he talks. You hear it before you see it, the machine coming to life. Far off, the thud and rumble of the water pumps that feed the fountains, the scrape of shovels at hearths as fire boys clear last night's ash, shutters unfolding, one crash at a time, down a facade a quarter-mile long, each one letting in another slab of grey winter light that lands on the parquet and slides slowly across it as the sun climbs. Brooms, hundreds of brooms, the long hush, hush, hush of them, sweeping rooms the size of fields. Somewhere a dog, somewhere a voice practising scales, a chapel singer warm in his throat while the frost is still on the glass. And underneath it all, always, the small sounds of an enormous old building complaining about the cold. Ticks, groans, the crack of a settling beam that in your first week made you flinch every time, and now is just the palace talking in its sleep. By 7:30 the corridors begin to fill, and this is when your working day truly begins, because your job, at bottom, is this. You are Aubriot's legs. He stands at his door. You run everywhere else, messages, summonses, parcels, warnings, and every errand, every single one, ends the same way, at a door, where you stop and collect yourself and check your coat and raise your left hand and scratch. You have done it perhaps 40 times now, and your stomach still folds over every time. Because here's what Aubriot has been drilling into you, morning after morning, in the usher's room with a practice door he keeps propped against the wall. An actual door, salvaged, paint-worn, that generations of boys have learned on, and when you look closely you can see it. A faint pale patch at chest height, a patch the size of a hand, where the paint has been stroked away, molecule by 40 years of apprentice fingernails. Here's what he drills. The scratch itself has grammar, too loud, and it's a knock in disguise. Insolence, too soft and no one hears it. And you're left standing in the corridor like a fool, and standing in a corridor like a fool at Versailles, in front of the people who are always watching, is its own kind of death. Too long, and you're presuming. Too short, and you're timid. And timidity is read as low birth, which you have, which is exactly why you can never show it. One stroke, downward, the length of your finger, firm enough to be heard through 2 inches of oak by someone listening for it, gentle enough to mean I am nothing, I am nobody, I am a breath of air that happens to be carrying a letter. Again, Aubriot says, you scratch the practice door. That was a mouse dying. Again, you scratch. That was a man who thinks he has rights. You have no rights. Again, you scratch. He watches you with his folded letter face, and finally, on the 4th try, he gives you the thing you've learned to live for, which is a single nod, no larger than the click of a latch. Now, he says, do it 400 more times, and you'll be almost adequate. You want to know how this happened, how a kingdom of 20 million people arrived at a place where knocking on a door became a class crime. So one evening in the usher's room, while Aubriot mends the seam of a glove with tiny surgeon stitches, He does everything with those still precise hands. You ask him, he doesn't look up from the glove. Because the king decided it, he says. That's the whole answer. But you want the long answer, so he bites off the thread. When the king was a boy, younger than you, the great nobles of France rose against the crown, the Fronde, soldiers in Paris, mobs breaking into the palace itself, into the boy king's own bedchamber one night, to see with their own eyes whether he'd fled. He had to lie there and pretend to sleep while strangers filed past his bed. Paris did that to him. The nobility did that to him. He never forgave either one, and he never forgot that a nobleman with an army and an income and a fortress of his own is a king's death waiting for a date. So when he was grown, he built this. Obriot lifts his chin at the walls, the ceiling, all of it. And he moved the court out of Paris, away from the mobs into the middle of what was a hunting marsh. And then he did the truly clever thing. He didn't ban the nobles from power. He made them compete for nonsense instead. Who hands the king his shirt in the morning? Who holds the candle at night? Who sits on a stool in the queen's presence and who must stand? Who goes through which door? He took men whose grandfathers made war on kings, and he got them spending their fortunes and their lives fighting each other over the right to watch him eat. A duke who is scheming to carry a candlestick is a duke who is not scheming to raise Normandy. Etiquette, boy, is what the king built instead of prisons. It's cheaper, and the inmates guard each other. He holds the glove up to the light, checks the seam, sets it down. And the scratching? The scratching is the etiquette of etiquette. Knocking is demand. Demand belongs to one man in this palace. Everyone else requests. The nail on my finger. He extends it again. That one groomed nail, absurd and deadly serious, is 34 years of understanding that. They say it started in the king's own antechambers generations back and spread outward the way everything here spreads outward, because whatever is done nearest the king becomes the definition of being human, and whatever is done far from him becomes the definition of being an animal. In Paris, they knock. That tells you what Versailles thinks of Paris. He stands, brushes nothing off his coat, and delivers the sentence you will remember for the rest of your life. The first of many he will leave in you like nails in a beam. Everything in this palace is a door, Baptiste. Even the people. Learn which ones you may touch. And the days grind on, and you learn. You learn the geography first, because you have to. A runner who gets lost is a runner who is late, and lateness here is measured against the most punctual man in Europe. The King's Day runs like the great clock in the Cour de Marbre, rising at 8:30, with 100 of the greatest men in France packed into his bedchamber in order of rank to watch him be shaved. Mass at 10, council at 11, dinner at 1, alone at table in public with a crowd standing to watch him eat. Because watching this one old man eat soup is a privilege men bankrupt themselves to keep. A walk or a hunt in the afternoon, even now at 72 gouty, in his rolling chair some days, he goes out in weather that keeps younger men indoors, because he has spent his whole life demonstrating that the king does not feel what you feel. Evening apartment, cards and billiards and music in the staterooms 3 nights a week. Supper at 10, in public again, the whole family in a row. Bed towards midnight, with the candle ceremony, where the honour of holding the candlestick for 2 minutes is granted each night to one nobleman, by name, and grown men. This is true, you've seen their faces. Grown men who own castles wait on that name the way starving men wait on bread. They say it never varies by 5 minutes. They say a man in the farthest province of France, if he owns an almanac and a watch, can tell you exactly what the king is doing at this hour. You believed that was a fable until you lived inside it. It is not a fable. It's the tick of the machine you now oil. You learn the marble staircase and the hall of mirrors, which you crossed for the first time at a run with a message and then had to stop, actually stop, mid-errand, law-breakingly, because nothing in your 15 years had prepared you for it. 73 meters long, 17 arched windows on one side, filled that morning with low silver winter light off the gardens, and facing them 17 arches of mirror. 357 pieces of mirrored glass, Aubriot told you later, made in Paris by workmen lured away from Venice. Because at the time only Venice knew the secret of mirrors that size, and France stole it. And there are stories, which Aubriot neither confirms nor denies, that Venice sent poisoners after those workmen to keep the secret, and some of them died strangely. You stood in the middle of that hall with the letter in your fist, between a wall of winter and a wall of reflected winter, under a ceiling where 30 painted battles roll overhead in gold and storm blue, and you saw 100 versions of one small blue-coated boy hanging in the glass, and every version looked equally like he did not belong there. Then a voice behind you said, "Moving or decorative?" "Sendu." One of the older runners grinning, and you moved. You learn the smells the way a blind man learns a house. Beeswax and orange blossom in the staterooms, where the king's nose, famously delicate, must never be offended. There are tubs of orange trees in silver planters, even in winter, and their sweetness lies over everything like a lid. Then you step through a service door, into the world behind the world, and the lid comes off. Tallow, cabbage, latrines, wet wool, the tang of brass polish, chamber pots waiting on landings for collection like grim little offerings. 2 smells, one wall apart. The whole palace is like that. A silk glove over a chapped hand, and your work carries you back and forth through the wall 20 times a day, so that your nose lives in 2 centuries at once, and you learn the corridor's second population, not the courtiers, the watchers of courtiers. Because here is the thing that took you weeks to fully understand, the thing that makes your shoulder blades itch to this day. At Versailles, everyone is performing all the time, and therefore everyone is also audience all the time. A marquis crossing an anteroom is reading every face he passes and being read by every face he passes. Who bowed to whom, and how deep, and who was seen speaking to whom, and who was not greeted. All of it is recorded in 1,000 skulls and traded that same evening like currency, because it is currency. The favour of the king cannot be seen directly. It can only be read in signs, the way farmers read weather. And so the palace watches itself, endlessly. 10,000 barometers all measuring each other. Nobody watches you, of course. You're a blue coat. You're furniture that walks. You will learn, in time, that this is the single greatest power you have. Your first winter hardens into routine, and the routine has teeth. Up in the black cold at 6, down the servants' stair with your palms skating the icy rail. The usher's room, the tin cup of thin broth that scalds your split knuckles when it slops, the inspection of the nail. Then the runs begin. A note from the apartments of the Princess de Conti to a lady on the far side of the south wing. 11 minutes at a fast walk, because running in the staterooms is forbidden, so you learn the runner's gait, that swift gliding walk with the hips level and the face calm. Urgency worn entirely below the waist, a parcel of sheet music, a summons for a physician, a box, astonishingly heavy, that you're not to tilt, from the silversmith's man at the gate to a countess's femme de chambre. 4 flights up, your fingers dying by the second landing, the wire handle cutting a white groove across them, and you may not stop, and you may not shift your grip in view of anyone, because a blue coat straining is a blue coat noticed. And then at the top, compose the face, settle the breath, left hand up, 1 clean stroke of the nail down the painted oak. Entree, as if you'd floated there. Your left little fingernail is a proper tool now, a pale sliver you guard like money. You've caught yourself cradling that hand against your chest in crowds. Fabien, the boy who shares your attic partition, 16 from Picardy, 2 years in the household, missing 1 front tooth and cheerful about it, laughs at you for it, and then shows you his own nail and the small habits he's built around it, how he wraps that fingertip in a twist of rag before any rough carrying, how he trims and files it every Sunday with a care his own hair has never once received. First winter I broke mine on a coal scuttle, he says. 6 weeks it took growing back. 6 weeks scratching with a stub, sounding like a beggar at every door in the palace. An usher's boy is his nail, country mouse. The rest of you is just what carries it around. It's Fabien who teaches you the underside of the palace, the parts of the machine Aubriot considers beneath instruction. Which kitchens will slip a runner a heel of bread, and which will report you for asking. The unlit stair where you can sit for 5 minutes and no one passes. How the water gets here and this one bends your mind. How the fountains that shame every court in Europe are fed by a machine at Marly on the Seine, 7 kilometres away, 14 water wheels the size of houses and 250 pumps hammering day and night. The most complicated machine on earth, they say, built by thousands of men of whom a great many died of marsh fever in the building. And even so, even with all that iron groaning away on the river, there's not enough water. There's never been enough water. On ordinary days the fountains stand dry, and when the king walks the gardens, boys run ahead of him along the paths whistling signals, and the fountaineers open each fountain just before he turns the corner and shut it just after he passes, so that the king moves through a garden that leaps to life around him and dies behind his back. And he knows it, everyone knows it, and the pretending holds, because the pretending is the point. The whole palace is that, Fabien says, tapping his temple. Fountains that only play where the king is looking. Remember it and you'll never be confused here again. You eat standing mostly. Bread, broth, on feast days a marvel of scraps from the great kitchens, where the leavings of the royal table cascade down through the household in order of rank. The king's leftovers are a recognised perquisite, sold, some of them, out a side gate to Parisians who pay good money to eat what the king merely looked at, and by the time the cascade reaches blue coats, it is bones and crusts. But the bones have marrow, and the crust a white wheat bread, whiter than anything your mother ever baked, and you gnaw them in a draughty passage with your back to the cold wall and your feet throbbing, and you think, I eat the king's bread, both meanings. You're never sure which one is the joke. At night, the last runs, the palace contracting toward the coucher, candles going out wing by wing until the building floats in the dark park like a lit ship. Then the attic, the pallet, Fabien already snoring, the canvas partition breathing in and out with the draught, your legs ringing like struck iron, your hands, you inspect them by feel in the dark, thumb travelling over each split knuckle, over the good nail, confirming it, your one credential. And sleep takes you before you finish the inspection, every night, mid-thought, like a candle pinched out. And through all of it, doors. Doors beyond counting. You could walk the palace blind now and know where you are by the doors alone. The boom of the tall stateroom doors when the ushers swing them for a prince, a sound like a ship taking a wave. The flat clack of service doors on their bare hinges, the particular squeal. Third door, north attic stair, that you dodge by lifting the door on its hinges as you close it, a trick Fabian taught you the way his predecessor taught him. Knowledge passed down a chain of boys going back before either of you was born. And on every polished door in the noble parts of the palace, if the light falls low and raking, you can see it. The mark. A faint, dull patch in the paint, hand high beside the latch. The ghost written by 10,000 fingernails. Scratch wear. The palace's own skin, worn thin in the one spot where humility touches it, over and over, year after year. Once you've seen it, you can't stop seeing it. The grandest doors in Europe, and every one of them carries a small pale scar that says, "Here is where everyone admitted what they were." Aubrio catches you looking at one of those marks one afternoon, tilting your head to raise the sheen. "You've found the palace's diary," he says. "Good. Now I'll tell you how to read a person the same way." He draws you back against the wall out of the traffic of an anteroom and lowers his voice into the register he keeps for the real lessons. Watch hands at doors. Nothing else tells you as much. A man raised at court scratches without breaking his sentence. The hand knows the door the way your tongue knows your teeth. A man newly arrived from his province hesitates a half-beat and glances at his own finger first. A man in desperation scratches twice. You'll hear it. The double scratch forbidden, it slips out of them like a sob. And a man about to do something violent to his own future, the folded letter face comes as close to expression as it ever does, stands in front of the door too long. Doors are where this palace stops pretending, boy. For half a second, at the door, every soul in Versailles is exactly the size it really is. He straightens, resumes his post, becomes furniture again. You are beginning, though you could not yet say it in words, to understand that Monsieur Aubrio, invisible man at an oak door, may see more of the kingdom of France than the ministers do. In the spring you see a man destroyed by a knock. You will tell this story for the rest of your life, and no one outside the palace will ever fully believe it, and that disbelief will teach you how strange the water is that you have learned to swim in. It happens on a grey morning in the antechambers on the Queen's side, where the traffic is thick. Petitioners, provincial nobility up for the season, the whole slow river of people who have come to Versailles because Versailles is where France is decided, hoping to be seen, hoping for a word, a nod, a place. You're waiting with a message when he arrives. A gentleman of maybe 40, good broadcloth coat a year behind the fashion, boots that have known actual mud, a face burnt brown at the jawline where a country hat stops the sun. A baron, someone says later. From the Rouergue, someone says, so far south the winters are different. He has, it turns out, been waiting for 11 days to present a petition regarding a lawsuit that is eating his family's land, and this morning, finally, he's been told the person he needs is within, and he is standing in front of the door, and he is tired, and he is far from home, and 11 days of antechambers have scraped him down to the wood, and he knocks. 3 raps. Ordinary human raps, knuckle on oak, the sound every door in his life has always received, the sound of an honest man announcing himself. The antechamber does not gasp. That's the thing you couldn't have invented. Nobody gasps, nobody cries out. Instead, the room does something worse. It goes still, and then it turns, with a soft rustle of silk, like a field of grain leaning under one push of wind, and it looks at him. 40 faces, powdered, patched, arranged. not shocked, interested. The way people look at a carriage accident that is happening to someone else slowly, and will keep happening to him for years. The door does not open. The door will now never open. Somewhere on the other side of it, you understand, a servant heard those 3 raps and made a decision that required no thought at all. The Baron waits. He doesn't yet know he is dead. He waits with his petition in his hand, and around him the antechamber begins quietly to feed. A woman's fan tips up to cover the lower half of her face, and behind it she says something to her neighbour, and the neighbour's eyes shine. A young man drifts, unhurried, toward a knot of friends by the window, and a moment later the knot flexes with suppressed laughter. The whisper moves along the walls in both directions at the speed of malice. He knocked. He knocked. Did you hear it? He knocked like a coalman. By afternoon it's in every wing of the palace. By evening you hear it yourself, ferrying a note through the apartment, past the card tables floating in candlelight. It has been polished into a performance. A duchess's daughter, 17, is doing it for a half circle of listeners, rapping her knuckles daintily on a tabletop. Tot, 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 and the half circle dissolves, gowns shaking, a marquis wiping his eyes, and someone gasps out that this is how they announce themselves in the Rouergue, and someone else says he must have thought he was calling on his farrier, and you stand there holding your note, a farrier's actual son, invisible in your blue coat, watching the most refined people in the world laugh at a man for greeting a door honestly. The Baron leaves Versailles 2 days later. His petition was never read. You know, because Fabian knows everything, that he asked for an audience twice more and was twice not refused. Nothing so definite as refusal. Merely not received indefinitely, smilingly forever. There is no punishment at Versailles, you understand now. There is only the door that will never open again, and the laughter moving through the walls, and the great cold machine of attention swinging away from a man as if he had stopped existing, because as far as this world is concerned he has. That night in the attic you lie awake longer than usual, listening to the wind work at the roof slates. Fabien, the Baron, all he did was knock. Fabien's quiet long enough that you think he's asleep. Then, no, all he did was show them he didn't know the code. The knock was nothing, wood and knuckles, but the code is how they tell each other, apart from everyone else in France, see? 20 million people out there, and maybe 5,000 in here, and the only wall between those numbers is knowing things like the scratch. So when a man gets the code wrong, he isn't rude, country mouse. He's a hole in the wall. And they swarm a hole in the wall like bees swarm a tear in the hive. It's not even cruelty quite. It's repair. He rolls over. The straw ticks and settles. Sleep. Grand couvert tomorrow. You're first. You'll want your legs. But you don't sleep. Not for a while. You lie there doing arithmetic you can't stop. 11 days ago that man had land, a name, a lawsuit he might have won. This morning he had all of that plus one gesture. Tock, tock, tock. Half a second of sound. You think about your own fist, an inch from a duchess's door last winter, and Aubriot's hand closing on your wrist, and for the first time you understand that he wasn't saving you from embarrassment. He was saving your life. Because you're a blue coat, and blue coats don't get 11 days in a story. Blue coats get the road. You fall asleep with your left hand curled against your chest, the nail tucked into your palm like a coin, and you dream, you will remember this. You dream of the doors of your father's village, plank doors, byre doors, the church door with its iron studs, and in the dream you go from one to another knocking on each as loudly as you can, both fists like hammering hot iron, and nobody anywhere minds at all. The Grand Couvert is the king eating supper. That's all it is. And it is also the strangest theatre in Europe, and you're given a walk-on part in it because a footman is sick and bodies are needed to stand along the service route, and standing along a service route is a thing even a first-year bluecoat can be trusted to do. 10 o'clock at night. The antechamber of the king's apartment blazing. You have never seen so many candles burning in one room. Later you'll learn the household goes through wax on a scale that has its own officers, its own accounts, its own thefts, because at Versailles a candle once lit for the king is never lit twice, and the half-burnt stubs are a perquisite worth real money, an entire economy dripping quietly off the chandeliers. The heat of them, after the corridor cold, hits your face like opening an oven. Under it, the smells stack up in layers you can almost see. Hot wax, roasted meat arriving in waves from a kitchen so far away. The dishes travel by covered procession and arrive barely warm. Powder, scent, and the deep animal note beneath it, all of a crowd packed shoulder to shoulder in silk and standing, all of them standing, because at the Grand Couvert almost nobody sits. At the table, the royal family in armchairs in a row on one side facing the room like a tribunal, the king in the centre, and you, wedged at your post by the service door with a napkin over your arm as costume, see him properly for the first time in your life. He is old. That's your first thought, and it arrives with the jolt of something close to fear, because it feels illegal to think it. 72. And this year has aged him. The great wars going badly in the north, the winter's famine still in every face in France. He is heavy in the chair, the famous face fallen, the skin like wax gone cool. But then he moves, turns his head to hear something the Duchess of Burgundy leans in to say, and everything you've heard is suddenly true, because the head turns like the head of a statue deciding to move, with a slowness that isn't age, it's weight, the accumulated weight of 67 years of being the only man in the room who never has to hurry, and the whole chamber's attention swings with the movement like water tilting in a bowl. He eats enormously. This too you'd been told and didn't believe. Soups, plural, whole fowl. He eats with his fingers largely, with astonishing neatness. Forks exist. Forks sit right there in front of him, the finest forks on earth, and the old king has spent his life disdaining them as a fussy novelty, and so France's supreme arbiter of refinement eats his chicken with his hands while 300 people watch. And this is not a contradiction. Nothing the king does can be a contradiction. The king is the standard, and the standard tonight has grease on its royal fingers and a napkin the size of an altar cloth. And around him the machine performs. Every dish arrives in procession and is bowed to. Bowed to. The food itself. Men uncovering their heads as the king's meat passes in the corridor. And you nearly laughed the first time you saw it in rehearsal, and Fabienne's elbow found your ribs like a knife. Every glass of wine is called for aloud, poured with tasting rituals older than anyone can explain, presented at the exact angle. Nobody speaks unless the king speaks to them. 300 courtiers stand watching him chew in silence upholstered by the small sounds of service. Silver on porcelain, wine into crystal, the shuffle of 500 feet easing on parquet, and their faces. You have leisure to study their faces, are not bored. That's the thing that gets under your skin. They are attending, rapt. Because at any moment the old man may look up and speak to someone, one someone, and that word will be capital for a month. And because to be here at all, watching this, is the difference between being someone and being the Baron from the Rouergue. The Duchess of Burgundy makes the king laugh twice during the meal. You watch it happen. She is the young wife of the king's grandson, second in line to the throne, and she is small and quick and not beautiful exactly, but lit up from inside in a way that reads across a crowded room, and she is the only person at that table, the only person you will ever see in all your years here, who teases the king, leans against his chair, says things into his old ear that make the wax face crack and the shoulders shake. She has been at court since she was 11, raised half as a daughter to him, and the whole palace knows what you can see plainly from your post by the service door. This ancient, isolated, iron-scheduled man loves her, the way ordinary men love their granddaughters, and she is the last warm thing in his life. And when she laughs, the entire room relaxes by a degree, as if the building itself unclenched. Remember her. Remember her laughing of her hand on the king's chair, in the candle blaze, in the winter of the hard years, with 300 people pretending not to watch. You get back to the attic past 1 in the morning, feet ruined, head ringing with light. Fabien is awake, waiting to hear. Well, the Grand Couvert, say it. You search for it, staring up into the dark under the slates, and what comes out is, it's the fountains. A pause, then Fabien laughs, one soft huff, because he taught you the word himself. Fountains that only play where the king is looking. A whole nation's wealth pumped uphill through groaning machinery, so that one old man never has to see anything ordinary, never a dry basin, never a knocked door, never an unwatched meal. A world arranged so completely around a single point of view that the point of view has become the only real thing in it, and everything else, the wax and the bowing and the silence and you, is plumbing. Now you know where you live, Fabien says, and rolls over and is asleep in a minute. You lie there a while longer with your left hand against your chest, feeling your heart beat against your fingers, and outside the wind crosses the great dark gardens where the fountains stand empty because no one is looking, and far below you somewhere a door closes softly, and softer than that, fainter than mice. You'd swear you can hear it even now, even at this hour, somewhere in the endless building, a fingernail on oak, someone scratching, someone always is. Summer comes, and with it the strangest discovery of your first year. Versailles is open. Anyone may enter. Anyone. This palace that regulates fingernails has almost no wall against the public. The courtyards and gardens and even the state apartments admit any subject of the king who is decently dressed, and at the gates there are stalls that rent swords to men who arrive without one, because a sword is required dress for a gentleman, and the fiction that every visitor is a gentleman must be maintained. And so a Paris grain dealer up for the day hires a sword the way you'd hire a mule, straps it on over his Sunday coat, and strolls in past the Swiss guards to watch the king go to mass. The crowds on high days are rivers. They press along the route to the chapel 10 deep. They fill the hall of mirrors with the smell of Paris, sweat, garlic, street mud, right there among the orange trees, and the courtiers wade through them without seeing them, and pickpockets work the crush like gleaners at harvest, and every so often something goes missing from the palace itself. A silver tassel, a fringe cut clean off a curtain, once famously braid snipped from a coat while the coat was being worn, and the machine absorbs it all and rolls on, because the king long ago decided that his glory must be visible to be real, and a fountain no one sees might as well be dry. You running your errands through those summer crowds, learn to read them too. The gawpers, heads back, mouths open at the ceilings. The petitioners clutching their papers, rehearsing under their breath. The provincial gentry, stiff with the effort of pretending familiarity. And here and there, moving through all of them like pike through minnows, the courtiers proper, the 5,000, identifiable at any distance not by their clothes. A rich Parisian can buy the clothes, but by their hands and their pace. They never hurry, they never gawk. And at doors their left hands rise without thought, and the nail touches the wood, and the crowds watching them learn, some of them, and go home to Paris and grow a nail on the left little finger, because the fashion leaks. Everything leaks. And Fabien swears there are lawyers' clerks on the Ile de la Cité scratching at each other's doors now in solemn imitation of a code invented to exclude them. And when he tells you this, you both laugh until the usher's room warden bangs the wall. That summer you also nearly lose everything, and it happens in half a second, the way everything here happens. You are carrying a message up the Escalier des Princes at the runner's glide when your shoe, soles worn to paper, you'd been meaning to see the cobbler for a month, goes out from under you on the marble. You catch yourself on the balustrade. The message stays in your right hand, but your left hand slaps stone, full force, all your weight through the palm, and you feel it before you dare look. The nail. Split to the quick, hanging by a corner, blood already welling dark around it. The pain is nothing. You're a farrier's son. You've been kicked by horses. You stand on that staircase feeling actual horror, cold and total, over a fingernail, and some distant room of your mind notes what has happened to you this year, that you've become a person who could weep over keratin, and you deliver your message with your left hand behind your back, and then you go and find Fabien. He looks at it the way your father looked at lamed horses. 6 weeks, he says, maybe 7. Right hand's no good. Scratching right-handed marks you as a lefty faking they read it. Don't ask me how, he thinks. Then he takes your ruined finger, and from the seam of his own coat he produces a needle of horn, filed flat and thin, and shows you the trick that boys have passed to boys in this household for longer than anyone knows. The splint of horn tucked under the split nail's corner, bound with waxed silk thread so fine it vanishes at arm's length, and above all the adjusted stroke. Shorter, angled, letting the horn edge touch the wood so that the sound, the all-important sound, stays true. You'll scratch through the splint till the nail grows out, he says, binding the thread with his tongue between his teeth. It'll pass at any door in the palace except one place, and you won't be sent there. So breathe. Which place? The king's own antechamber. The ushers there can hear the difference between a nail and horn. He says it flatly. No wink, and you never do find out whether it's true, and the not knowing is very Versailles. The deepest rooms of the machine guarded by abilities that may be real, may be legend, and function identically either way. The splint holds, the nail grows back, and something else grows with it, because injury is education. You begin to notice, everywhere, the other splints. The palace, seen from the blue coat angle, is one vast system of patched failures wearing an unbroken face. The countess whose diamonds are paste because the real ones went quietly to a money lender in the Rue Quincampoix. Fabien knows which lender. The chevalier who dines splendidly twice a week in public and fasts the other 5 days in his freezing attic room, because yes, the great nobles get apartments of parquet and marble, but the mere gentry of the court are stacked into the palace's upper floors in cells that would shame a monastery. Hundreds of them, whole families in 2 rooms under the leads, roasting in summer, freezing in winter, emptying their own slops, all for the address, all to be at Versailles, because a man who leaves court leaves the king's sight, and the king has a famous phrase for requests made on behalf of anyone absent, a phrase that closes doors forever. I do not know him. Half this glittering crowd is starving upward, you realise. The palace is a lit ship, and below the waterline it's all pumps and patches and men bailing in the dark, and the whole crew's shared, sacred, unbreakable agreement is that the passengers on the sunlit deck must never hear the bailing. You're 16 now. Your voice has finished breaking. You have a splintered nail, a runner's legs, and a working knowledge of the strangest human system ever constructed. Aubriot has begun, without announcement, to teach you the deep material, precedence, the tabouret, which duchesses may sit on a stool in the presence of royalty, and which must stand, the armchair, chair, stool-standing ladder on which the whole species is ranked, who enters a room first, who exits first, which of the palace's doors are doors and which are honours that happen to have hinges. He teaches the way a mason teaches, one stone at a time, testing each before laying the next. And one October evening at the end of a lesson, he looks at your left hand, at the regrown nail, and then at you. Longer than he usually allows himself to look at anything. You'll do, he says. 2 words. From Aubriot, a coronation. You float up the 67th staircase to your attic that night, and you write your mother a letter. You can write now. A chapel clerk has been teaching runners their letters on Sunday afternoons for a fee of errands. And in the letter you tell her you are valued. You are learning a position. You are warm, which is one lie among truths. And you do not tell her about the Baron from the Rouergue, or about what you've started lately to hear in your dreams, which is nothing terrible, which is only this, scratching. Doors and doors and doors of it, the whole palace at your dream's horizon, gently, endlessly, asking to be let in. In your 2nd year, Aubriot takes you up on the roofs. It's an errand, officially, a message for the clock-keeper's man, who is aloft seeing to the bell. But when it's done, Aubriot doesn't turn back down the stair. He leads you instead along a plank walk between the slopes of slate and lead, through a forest of chimneys, chimney after chimney after chimney, hundreds of them, each one trailing its thread of smoke in the cold blue air, and out to the balustrade above the central range, and he stops, and he lets you look. You have never been higher than a hayloft in your life, unless you count the attic where you sleep, which has no window worth the name. Now the whole world unrolls. Below you, the gardens fall away down the great axis toward the sunset, the parterres laid out like embroidery, the fountains, the long silver blade of the Grand Canal driving west into haze, a canal so large the king keeps actual ships on it, gondolas sent from Venice, a scaled frigate, a fleet for a lake dug by soldiers in a swamp. The geometry of it seizes something in your chest. Every tree in ranks, every hedge a wall, every path ruled like a ledger. Thousands of acres of ground forced into perfect obedience, and you know now what it costs. The armies of gardeners, the full-grown trees hauled in from the forests of half of France, dying by the 100 and replanted without comment, the marsh water, the fevers, the Mali machine thundering away out of sight beyond the hills. You know the plumbing now, and still it stops your breath. That's the trap of this place, and you feel it close on you gently up there in the wind. Knowing how the trick is done does not free you from the trick. To the east, the other direction, the 3 great avenues come together at the palace gates like rays into a sun, and along them crawls the traffic of the world, Carriages, carts, riders, the endless supply train of a small city that exists for one household, and beyond them the town, and beyond the town, somewhere under the horizon's smoke, Paris, which the king does not visit, which you have still never seen. Every man who serves in this house, Obriot says, should stand here once a year. Do you know why? You wait. His lessons are never guesses. Because down there, he nods at the palace beneath your feet, the courtyards, the wings, the 700 rooms full of the 5,000. It is possible to believe that the ranks of heaven are real, that a duke is truly a different creature from a footman, the way a hawk is different from a hen. Up here you can see the whole cage at once. It has walls. It was built. I've spoken with men whose fathers dug the foundations. It was mud, boy. It was a hunting bog with one small house on it, inside living memory. Everything below us was made. The marble was made, the etiquette was made, the scratching was made. Men decided it. Other men learned it. And now everyone performs it so perfectly that they've forgotten it was ever decided at all. He is quiet a moment. The wind moves the smoke threads all one way, like the candle flames in the state rooms. I don't tell you this to make you insolent. Insolence is death, and what was made is still real. Real as winter. A made wall will still break your head. I tell you because a man who serves a machine his whole life deserves to know, once a year, that it is a machine. It keeps something in you alive. I don't have a word for the something, but I've watched men lose it, and after they lose it they are excellent servants and no longer persons, and I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen to any boy of mine. It is the longest speech you will ever hear him make, and the only time he will ever say any boy of mine. Far below, a fountain leaps suddenly to life at the head of the Latona parterre, glitters for a minute, and dies. Somewhere down there, the king has turned a corner. Obriot watches it with his folded letter face. Come, he says, doors don't hold themselves. That winter, you're second, you're given your own door. It is not a grand door. It is the door of an antechamber on the north side, through which pass the household officers of a prince's establishment. A door of middling honour and steady traffic, and holding it means standing beside it for hours at a stretch, opening it for those with the right, remaining planted before it like a post for those without, and knowing, always, instantly, which is which. Obriot stands with you the first 3 days. On the 4th, he is simply not there, and the corridor is yours, and the first time a gentleman you don't recognise approaches at speed, and you must decide in 4 strides whether to reach for the handle, you feel your whole future balance on the head of a pin. He is the prince's new subintendent. You open. He passes without seeing you. Without seeing you. That's the wage of doing it perfectly. Nothing. A door well held is invisible. An usher well trained is invisible. And there are days that winter when you stand 6 hours in the cold draught of that corridor, and not one of the 100 people who pass lays their eyes on you even once, and you go up to the attic at night feeling like something that faded during the day and has to grow solid again in the dark. Fabien, who holds a door now too on the south side, calls it turning to wallpaper. You'll get used to it, he says. That's the bad news, same as the good. But the wallpaper hears everything. That's the other discovery of the second winter. People talk in front of you the way they talk in front of clocks, standing at your door, motionless, eyes at parade rest. You learn things no one has any idea they are teaching you. Which minister's credit is failing, which marriage is war by other means, what the couriers from the Northern Front said before the official version was agreed on. The war is going badly, has been going badly for years. The whole grinding war over who will sit on the throne of Spain, France against half of Europe, and the money is gone. The king has sent his own gold plate to the mint. The king eats off silver gilt and then off porcelain. And the harvest failures stalk the provinces, and none of it is permitted to alter the machine by one candle or one bow. The grand couvert proceeds, the appartement proceeds, the fountains leap where the king walks. Only standing at your door you hear the difference now in the voices. A note under the wit, a hairline crack under the lacquer, and you begin to understand that the perfection of the ritual is no longer pride. It is a grip. The tighter the etiquette, the worse the news. The old king is holding his world together with both hands, and the whole palace, 5,000 barometers, feels the pressure drop and performs the sunshine harder. You're 17. You know the machine now. You believe, everyone believes, that it will simply go on, because it has gone on for longer than anyone has been alive. You're all about to learn otherwise in the space of 11 days, and it begins as everything at Versailles begins, with a door. It is February of 1712, and the Duchess of Burgundy has a toothache. That is how it arrives. Not with bells, not with couriers. With a toothache mentioned in passing, the way weather is mentioned. She is 26 now, and more than ever the lamp of the place, because the world has changed since your first grand couvert. The king's son, the old Dauphin, died of smallpox last spring at Meudon, in one terrible night that emptied Versailles of every person who could flee the contagion, and so her husband, the young Duke of Burgundy, is Dauphin now, heir direct, and she is the future Queen of France, and the old king, who has buried his son, holds to her more visibly than ever. She organises his evenings. She sits with him in the low, warm rooms of Madame de Maintenon. She's the future arriving on quick feet, and the whole court, which invests in futures the way merchants do, orbits her accordingly. On the 5th of February she's at the theatre. On the 6th, the toothache. Then a fever that comes and goes. Then a pain beneath the temple that does not go, that has her, by the 9th, unable to bear light or sound. And now the word begins to move through the palace in the way you have learned to feel, not spoken so much as pressurized, passed at doors, in the drop of a voice, in which physicians are seen walking fast and in which direction. Measles, they begin to say. It is in Paris. It is in the town of Versailles. It has been climbing the hill all winter. Your door these days stands 2 corridors from the apartments of the Dauphine, and so you're inside the weather of it. You watch the traffic change hour by hour. The friends first, then the officials, then the physicians. 1, 3, 7, 9 of them. The great consulting swarm of the court medicine that, Fabien mutters, has killed more princes than war. And then the traffic changes again, and it is the other direction. Courtiers beginning, delicately, to be elsewhere. Contagion does at Versailles what nothing else can do. It reverses the magnetism. For 30 years the whole art of this place has been getting closer. Closer to the king, closer to the future queen, closer to the lit centre. And now, in a week, the art is distance, performed with the same perfection. The suddenly remembered estate, the aunt in Paris requiring a visit, the cough that obliges one with infinite regret to keep away from Her Highness's antechamber. She is bled. You know because you stand at your door while the surgeon's man passes with the covered basin, and the smell reaches you, Iron and warmth in the freezing corridor, a farrier's son smell, a slaughter yard smell, moving past at the level of your chest and gone. She is bled again. She's given emetics, opium. She's bled at the foot. The physicians of the court disagreeing in Latin while the fever climbs. And on the 11th of February, a Thursday, you are on the night watch at your door, past 2 in the morning, the palace dark and pretending to sleep, when you hear a sound you've never heard before and will never forget. Fast footsteps, running in the state corridors. And then, at the great door at the end of your corridor, a scratching that is wrong, too fast, too long. Scratch, 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 over and over, a nail dragged frantic and skidding across the paint. The sound of the code breaking down under a weight it was never built for, and a voice with it, low and cracking. Open! In God's name, open! It is a page of the Dauphine's household, 17 like you, and what he cannot make his hand do even now, even at the end of the world, is knock. The door opens. He is swallowed. You stand at your post with your heart slamming, and along the dark corridor, one after another, you hear latches, hinges, the palace waking door by door like a body waking nerve by nerve, and you know, everyone knows, the way a house knows. Marie Adélaïde of Savoy, Dauphine of France, dies the next evening, the 12th of February 1712 at Versailles, with the old king in the room. She's 26. The last thing the palace hears of her, the story goes, and you believe it, you heard the corridors that night, is not weeping and not prayer but silence. The specific, total, listening silence of 5,000 people who have just felt the future stop. And then it gets worse. Her husband, the Dauphin, had sat by her bed through the fever, holding her hand against every plea to preserve himself. By the day of her death he is marked already. The same fire in the blood, the same rash rising. And he will not be parted from grief long enough to be doctored, and on the 18th of February, 6 days after his wife, the Dauphin of France dies too. He is 29. In 11 days, the king has lost the 2 people on whom the whole future of his house was arranged, and within 3 weeks more the fever takes their elder son as well, a child of 5, the little Duke of Brittany, bled by the physicians until his younger brother, 2 years old, hidden away by his governess, who locks her door against the doctors and their lancets and simply keeps them out. Disobedience that will save the entire dynasty until that baby is all that stands between the old man and the extinction of his direct line. You live through those weeks at your door, and what you will try to explain for the rest of your life is the sound of them. Versailles in mourning is not loud. It is the quietest thing you have ever stood inside. The theatres close, the apartment ceases, the music stops wing by wing, and the machine, this is the thing, the machine does not stop. It runs muffled. The rituals continue in black. The lever, the mass, the couvert, the caucha, the candlestick honoured nightly to a nobleman in a room where somebody's face moves. And through it all the doors go on being scratched, softly, endlessly, the little mouse whisper at door after door after door. And there were nights that winter, standing your watch in the dead black corridor, when the scratching up and down the palace sounded to you exactly like something trying, very politely, to get out. You see the king once in those weeks, at a distance of 10 feet, passing to mass, 73 years old. He has buried his son, his grandson's wife, and his great-grandson inside 11 months. His face is powdered, composed, correct. He walks at the king's pace. Every door on his route stands open before he reaches it, the way doors have opened before him for 70 years, so that he moves through the palace as if through a world without doors at all. And it comes to you, watching that old man walk his unbroken clockwork route through the wreckage of his family, that this is the one mercy the machine has left to give him, and the one prison it will never let him out of. He does not get to hammer on a door either. He does not get to make any sound at all. The etiquette holds him exactly as hard as it holds you harder, because you at least are allowed to be nobody in the dark. That night, Obriot finds you at your post. He stands beside you a while in the cold, in the silence, watching the empty corridor, and then he says quietly, not as a lesson, just as a man, "Now you have seen it all, boy. The palace at its greatest and at its smallest, and they are the same size." He puts his hand once on your shoulder, the first time, the only time, and goes back to his own door. Grief at Versailles has a wardrobe, a schedule, and a price list. You learn this in the weeks after, because the household is drowned in the labour of it. Mourning is not a feeling here. It is a production, with degrees and durations regulated as precisely as bows. The court goes into full black. The apartments are hung with black. The coaches, the liveries, the very sword knots go black. And the drapers of Paris, Fabien has this from a cousin in the trade, the drapers of Paris sell out of black cloth to the last ell within days, and fortunes are made on dye, because when Versailles mourns, all France must be seen to mourn, and being seen as the entire mechanism of everything. Your own blue coat is exchanged for a plainer, darker one. You carry black-sealed letters now, hundreds of them, the whole machinery of condolence grinding out its correspondence to every court in Europe, including the courts France is at war with, because kings condole with kings even while their armies burn each other's provinces. That is another door with its own etiquette. You stand your watches. The palace stays quiet so long that you begin to flinch at ordinary sounds. A dropped log in a hearth booms like a cannon. And when at last, months on, the first music is permitted again in Madame de Maintenon's rooms, soft, just strings, you stand in the corridor outside with two other blue coats, and none of you speaks, and one of you, not you, wipes his face with his wrist quickly, the way you'd brush away a fly. And the deaths do their other work too, the work deaths always do here. They rearrange the doors, because the future has moved. The little Duke of Anjou, the 2-year-old saved by his governess's locked door, is Dauphin now, and overnight his nursery becomes a pole of the palace, and the traffic swings toward it, and precedences shift all down the line like freight in a listing ship. And you watch grown courtiers recalculate their entire lives in the space of a spring. Who now merits the armchair, who the stool, whose antechamber has become worth freezing in. There is something almost restful in watching it, in the way there is something restful in watching tide come in over mudflats. The machine cannot grieve, it can only re-rank. And the people inside it grieve through the machine in the only grammar they have. A duchess who loved the Dauphin weeps by wearing a mourning 1 degree deeper than her rank strictly requires, and everyone reads it, and it is understood exactly as a sob would be understood anywhere else on earth. The strangest thing is what happens to the scratching. For weeks after the deaths you notice, all the ushers notice, it becomes a quiet subject in the usher's room, that the scratches at the doors of the bereaved households come softer than code requires, nails barely breathing on the wood, as if the whole palace, without any order given, had agreed that even the mouse whisper was too loud for those corridors, and had invented inside its dead language a dialect of tenderness. Aubriot hears you describing it to Fabienne and does not correct you, which from Aubriot is agreement. Etiquette is a cage, he says later at the practice door apropos of nothing. But men will make anything human if you leave it in their hands long enough. Even a cage. Remember both halves of that. The seasons turn again. The war, unbelievably, begins to end. Peace signed at last in the year 13. The great bells of the chapel going for hours. The fountains run full for a day and a night so that the whole hill roars with water. And the palace, which held its perfect face through famine and plague and the death of the future, allows itself at last a summer. There are fireworks over the Grand Canal. You watch them from the roofs, officially checking for fallen sparks among the chimneys, actually standing beside Fabienne, with your fists on the cold balustrade and your mouth open like any grain dealer from Paris, while green and gold fire climbs off the black water, and the crowds along the parterre make a sound like the sea. And Fabienne says, "Look at us, wallpaper on a night out," and for once neither of you can stop laughing. Up there above 10,000 candles, two boys the machine has never once looked at, watching it burn money against the sky. You are promoted that autumn. Junior usher with a warrant, with wages. Real wages, some of which go home to Normandy twice a year by the carrier. And your mother has the parish clerk write back that your father read your letter 3 times aloud at the forge, which is the nearest your father has ever come to an embrace, and you know it. And it is enough. You train your own first boy the following spring, a mason's son from Chartres, 14, hands like paddles, who on his 9th day raises his fist to a door with a message and gets your hand closed around his wrist before bone touches wood, and you hear your own voice saying quietly, because everything here is said quietly, "What were you about to do?" And inside your chest, at the exact same moment, 34 years of Aubriot, and 3 of you settle into one shape, and you understand at last that this is how the palace actually endures, not through kings, through this, a hand on a wrist, a lesson at a door, passed down a chain of boys going back before anyone living, and forward past everyone living, the code outlasting every person it was ever meant to honour. You show him the nail. You give him the practice door, with its pale patch worn by 40 years of learners, and you add a rule of your own to Aubriot's canon, one you've never said aloud before. The scratch isn't grovelling, boy. Get that out of your head or it will poison the work. The scratch is a signature. It says, "I know exactly where I am." There is no man in this palace, none, from the king down, who is excused from knowing exactly where he is. We just signed smaller, now, again. Scratch. That was a mouse dying. Again. And then, in the August of 1715, the machine's one fixed point begins to fail. The king is 76. He has reigned for 72 years. No monarch in the history of Europe has reigned so long. Men have been born, grown old, and died knowing no other name on the coin. Since spring, the palace has watched him diminish, in the way the palace watches everything, sideways, silently, reading the signs, the appetite failing, the rolling chair more days than not, the face gone grey under the powder. In August, a pain begins in his left leg. The physicians call it sciatica. It is not sciatica. Within days the leg is marked with the black that every farrier's son has seen on beasts and knows on sight, and the word the surgeons will not say aloud in the corridors is said in every corridor anyway, at door after door in the mouse whisper gangrene. And the old man does the only thing he has ever done with pain, which is schedule around it. You are close to some of it, because by now you serve doors in the state apartments themselves, and what you witness in those last 3 weeks, you will spend the rest of your life failing to make anyone believe. The king, dying, holds court. He takes his meals in public while he can still sit. When he cannot sit, he receives from his bed ambassadors, ministers, the whole apparatus, and works with his ministers on the days the fever allows, and on the 25th of August, his name day, the feast of St. Louis, with the leg already lost and the rot climbing. He has the drums and oboes of his guards play beneath his window, as they have played on that day his whole reign, and he lies there in the smell of his own death, listening to the music of his own permanence, and the court stands in the chamber in its ranks and watches, because watching is its office, and nobody knocks, and nobody weeps where he can see, and the fountains, you have no doubt, played wherever his mind walked. On the 26th he says goodbye. He calls in the courtiers in order, even this in order, and then the little Dauphin is brought, his great-grandson, 5 years old now, the child saved by a locked door, and the whole antechamber where you stand can hear nothing of what is said, and the femme de chambre who carries the child out is weeping without any expression on her face at all, tears running down a perfectly composed court face, which is a thing you have seen only at Versailles, and hope never to see anywhere else. Word of the king's words to the boy is in the corridors by nightfall, as everything is, and whether the version you hear is exact hardly matters, because it is exactly true. I loved war too much. Do not imitate me in that, nor in the great expenses I have made. Try to relieve your people, which I was unlucky enough not to be able to do. 72 years, and at the end of them the most watched man on earth, apologizing to a 5-year-old. He takes 8 more days to die. He dies the way he did everything, on schedule and in public, asking near the end why he should be wept for, whether they had believed him immortal. And on the morning of the 1st of September, 1715, a Sunday, at 8:15, 4 days short of his 77th birthday, the candle goes out. You are at a door when it happens, of course. You are always at a door. And you know the moment not from any announcement but from the sound, or rather from the arrival, wing by wing of its absence. A stillness spreading through the palace like cold water through cloth, doors opening down the corridors one after another and no one coming through them. And then from the direction of the royal courtyard a single voice, and then many, and you learn later that the captain of the guard stepped to the balcony window and raised his hat with a black plume and said to the crowd below the words that reset the world, "The king is dead," and then, taking up a hat with a white plume, "Long live the king." 2 sentences, 1 breath between them. That breath is the only interval of no king that France is permitted, and the machine closes over it like water. What follows is the strangest fortnight of your service. The court does not stay to mourn. The court empties. The little king is taken away to Vincennes, air being judged better for him there, and the regent rules from Paris, and within days Versailles begins to go quiet in a way it has never been quiet in your lifetime or anyone's. The 5,000 melting away toward Paris where power now sleeps. The shutters closing down the great facade bay by bay. Whole wings falling silent. The orange trees still sweetening staterooms that no one crosses. And you and Fabien and the reduced household walk your rounds through corridors where your own footsteps come back at you off the marble. past door after door after door that no one will scratch at tomorrow, and Fabian says what you're both thinking softly. In the hall of mirrors with 17 dusk-filled windows burning down the length of it, and not one other living soul. The fountain only plays where the king is looking, and the king is looking at nothing now. The palace will stand mostly empty for 7 years. You cannot know that yet. Cannot know that the little boy will come back at 12, that the machine will fill again, that the scratching will go on under 2 more kings for 3/4 of a century, right up until an October morning in 1789, when a crowd from Paris arrives at these gates and does not scratch, does not knock either, and after that no court will ever live here again. You cannot know that tourists in ages you can't imagine will shuffle through the hall of mirrors where you stood as a boy with a letter in your fist, photographing the ceiling, never once noticing, on the old doors that survive low and hand-high and catching only a raking light, the faint pale patches worn by 100 years of fingernails, the quietest ruin in France, the mark of everyone who ever admitted for half a second exactly what they were. You know only this, standing in the emptying palace at 18, that you were inside the machine at the hour it stopped and started again between 2 sentences, and that you have a trade in your hands, in one specific fingernail of your hands, and that Monsieur Aubriot, who is retiring at last to a niece's house in the town with his warrant pension and his still hands, said to you yesterday, handing over the horn splint needle he has carried in his coat seam for 30 years, because that too, it turns out, is passed down, said only, "Hold your doors, Baptiste, kings pass, doors stay." And they did, and they do. The empty years are the ones nobody ever asks you about, and they are the ones you end up loving. A skeleton household stays on. Guards, gardeners, clockmen, a handful of ushers to keep the fabric of the place alive, and you are one of them, kept on the strength of Aubriot's last word to the household comptroller, which was your name. Your work changes shape entirely. There are almost no messages now, almost no ranks to sort at doors, and instead there is the building itself, which without its 10,000 inhabitants turns out to be a living thing with a body that needs nursing. You walk it. That becomes the core of the work. The walking of the palace, morning and evening, wing by wing, with a lantern in winter, checking. You check for damp, which comes in like a thief the first unheated winter, and blooms grey on silk hangings worth more than parishes, and you learn to read a wall with your palm flat against it the way your father read a horse's leg. You check for mice, which arrive in armies now that the kitchens are cold, and you learn where the palace cat's den, and you carry them scraps, and they follow you on your rounds at a disdainful 20 paces, court cats to the bone. You check the shutters after every storm, all 2,000 windows worth, and you check the roofs. You know the roofs now like a shepherd knows his hill, every plank walk, every valley gutter, where the lead is thin, which chimney whistles in a north wind. And you check the doors. Someone has to. 700 rooms of doors, and unswung hinges seize, and unwaxed oak drinks the damp and swells. And so twice a year you and Fabien and 2 others go through the whole palace, opening and closing every door in it, one by one, day after day, oiling, easing, letting each one speak its creak and answering it. And there is one afternoon in the 2nd empty year, in a dim gallery on the north side, with dust hanging in the light like weather, when Fabien stops at a tall white and gold door, looks at the faint pale scratch mark beside its latch, looks down the gallery at door after door after door, standing silent, and then reaches out and raps on the oak with his knuckles twice sharp, The forbidden sound, knock knock, loud as musket shots in all that stillness. You both stand frozen. The sound rolls away down the gallery and dies. Nothing happens, no one turns, no fan comes up over a smile. There is no one left to be destroyed in front of. Huh, Fabien says, and rubs his knuckles and looks almost disappointed. And then the two of you laugh, quietly, out of pure habit. There is no one to hear you for 100 rooms in any direction, and you still laugh quietly. And you finish the gallery, and you never do it again, either of you. You couldn't say why. Yes, you could. The code is in your hands now, deeper than your hand's own habits. And besides, this is the truth you'd never say aloud. Knocking felt like kicking something that had died. You marry in the empty years. Her name is Madeleine. She's a lace-mender's daughter from the town, kept on with the wardrobe skeleton crew to fight moth in the stored hangings, and you caught her the way everything is done at Versailles, by degrees and through doors. A month of passing her workroom on rounds you'd rerouted for the purpose. A season of small talk with her needle going and her eyes down. And the day you finally stood in front of that workroom door with your heart hammering worse than it had at any duchess's threshold, and raised your left hand and scratched, and heard her laugh through 2 inches of oak, because she knew your scratch by then, she told you afterward, knew it from every other man in the household the way you'd know a voice. You're married in the town church in the spring of 1719. Aubriot comes, older, drier, still with the stillest hands in the room, and gives you as a wedding gift a thing that makes Madeleine blink and makes you turn away for a moment to master your face. The practice door. The actual practice door from the usher's room. Paint-worn, hand-high, pale patch and all. 40 years of boys' fingernails in it. Yours somewhere among them. The household has ordered a new one, he says. Folded letterface immaculate. This one has learned all it can. It stands in your 2 rooms in the town for the rest of your life. Visitors think it is a door. Your children will know better. And then in 1722 the machine comes back. You hear it before anything is announced. You, of all people, would. In a change in the traffic of workmen, in orders for wax and oil flooding the comptroller's office, in gardeners suddenly 10 times their number wrestling the parterres back into geometry, and then it is confirmed. The king is returning to Versailles. The little boy saved by a locked door is 12 now, and the regency is ending, and the court is coming home. That June you stand in the Cour de Marbre among the reassembled household, and watch the carriages come up the avenue in their dust, and the boy king steps down, and they say, and you are near enough to believe it, that on arriving he ran, actually ran. This child, raised on the etiquette of 2 courts, ran ahead of everyone into the gardens of the palace he had been taken from at 5, and the fountains, every fountain, played at once. Within a season it is all back. The 5,000, the candle blaze, the apartment, the crowds from Paris with their rented swords, the whole roaring quiet machine, and the scratching door after door after door, the mouse whisper filling the corridors again like water returning to a dry bed. You stand at your doors, senior now, grey coming in at your temples earlier than it should, the way it does with men who work winters in stone buildings, and you train boys, a new one every year or 2, masons' sons and weavers' sons, and one baker's son with the finest natural scratch you ever heard. A born wrist, wasted on bread. You give them Aubriot's rules and your own amendments, and one rule that is yours alone, delivered at the practice door's replacement on each boy's first morning. Before anything else, understand what the sound is for. It is not for the wood. Any fool can be heard by wood. It is for the person on the other side, so that they may be told a human being is here, in the smallest voice a human being can manage. Your whole trade is that one sentence. Everything else is corridors. Some of them understand. Some of them just learn it. Aubriot was right about which kind stay persons. He dies in 1724 in his niece's house. In February, in his sleep, still hands folded, the one soft door in the whole story. And half the ushers of the household walk down into the town behind his coffin through falling snow, and at the graveside you stand with your left hand curled against your chest, without noticing you are doing it until Fabien beside you nudges you and shows you his own hand, curled the same, and neither of you says anything, because there is nothing to say that the hands haven't. Before the years blur entirely, a few more days deserve to be lived whole, because they are the days that made the man, and they never made it into anyone's memoirs, because nobody writes memoirs about wallpaper. There is the day of the chapel, in his 3rd year, when he is posted at the tribune door for a Te Deum and stands for 2 hours inside music. The royal chapel is the last great thing the old king built, finished only a few years before Baptiste arrived, white stone and gold and a painted heaven 50 feet up, and the king hears mass from the upper level, while the court fills the floor below, and the choir and the organ together make a sound that Baptiste, farrier's son raised on one wheezing village harmonium, has no shelf in his mind to put anywhere. He stands at his door with his eyes at parade rest and the polyphony coming down through the stone into the soles of his feet, and he discovers that you can weep without moving a single muscle of your face, that the tears will actually stand in your eyes and dry there if you breathe slowly enough, and he files the discovery away with his other professional skills, between reading hands and easing hinges, and uses it 4 more times in his life and never once at a funeral. Beauty, it turns out, is harder on the composure than grief. Grief comes announced. There is the night of the fire scare in the winter after the deaths, when a chimney in the south attics catches. A deep chimney fire, the kind that roars like a beast in the wall. And the whole night household turns out with buckets and wet sailcloth, and Baptiste spends 4 hours in a smoke-filled roof space passing water, hand to hand with guards and gardeners, and one half-dressed marquis who happened to be quartered nearby, and worked the line all night without once mentioning his rank, and by dawn the fire is dead, and the marquis is filthy, and laughing with a scullion about something, rank dissolved completely in soot and relief. And by noon the same marquis passes Baptiste in a state corridor, clean, powdered, and looks through him exactly as before, and Baptiste understands that this is not hypocrisy, or not only. The night was real, and the day is real. The palace simply keeps them in different rooms like everything else. There is the whole education of his hands, which deserves its own accounting, because 40 years at doors builds a body the way 40 years at a forge does, only stranger. The right shoulder that sits a 1/4 inch lower from decades of easing great doors off their rests. The knees that learn to lock and unlock invisibly through a 6-hour watch. The winter skin. Every year from November to March, the split knuckles, the cracks at the thumb, creases that open and close like tiny mouths and sting in the wash basin, and the pot of mutton tallow and beeswax that Madeleine renders every autumn, that he rubs in at night by the fire, working it into each crack with the patience of a man oiling hinges, because his hands are the household's and must not bleed on white paint. And through all of it, exempt, cosseted, absurd, the nail. Trimmed and filed every Sunday of his working life, guarded through every bucket line and every frozen latch, the one part of a labouring man's body kept as carefully as a courtesan's, and when he finally dies, we're ahead of the story, forgive it, when he finally dies at 79, in his bed, in the town, his daughter will notice, washing his hands, that the left little fingernail is still a 1/4 inch long and smooth as horn, and she will leave it exactly as it is. And that is how he is buried, with his signature on. And there is the day, one day a year, most years, when he goes home. The household grants its old hands leave in rotation, and Baptiste takes his in high summer and rides the carrier's cart 3 days into Normandy, into the green wet country of his boyhood. And the first time he does it, at 19, he stands in front of his father's forge door, plank oak, iron-studded, smoke-blackened, the door of doors of his entire childhood, and his left hand starts to rise before he catches it. He stands there in the lane, appalled at himself, this close to scratching at his own father's door like a mouse, and then he laughs out loud, alone, the first fully loud sound he's made in a year, and he hammers on that door with his whole fist, boom, 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 the way an honest man greets a door, and his mother's voice inside says, God above, who's died? And that is how they learn he's home. Every year after, the same private ceremony, the fist, the boom, the small violence of belonging somewhere, and every year the last night of leave, lying in the loft over the forge with the smell of coal and horse and rain, the strange tug under the ribs that he stops fighting after the first few summers, because it is the truth and there's no arguing with it. He misses the palace, misses the mouse whisper, misses the machine that has never once looked at him. His mother sees it in him the way mothers see, and says only packing his bundle, both places can be yours, you know, it's allowed. And she is a farrier's wife from a village of 200 souls, and it is by a distance the wisest thing anyone says to him in 80 years, Aubriot included, and he carries it back up the hill like money. Let me stop the story here for a moment, the way you'd stop on a stair landing and tell you plainly what you have been living inside, because from the inside Baptiste can never quite see it, and from 3 centuries away you can. The scratching was real. That is the first thing to say, because it sounds invented. At the court of Versailles, under Louis XIV and Louis XV and Louis XVI, one did not knock at doors. One scratched at them gently with the fingernail, and courtiers grew the nail of the little finger long for the purpose. And memoir after memoir from the people who lived it sets it down as ordinary fact, the way you'd mention that people shook hands. Visitors from other countries recorded it with the fascination of naturalists describing a strange bird. A knock in those corridors was genuinely read as coarse, the gesture of bailiffs, tradesmen and provinces, and getting the code wrong in front of the wrong audience genuinely cost people, because Versailles was a machine for converting tiny signals into destiny. And that machine was built on purpose. That's the second thing. The suffocating etiquette of Versailles, the ranked chairs, the candlestick honour, the right to hand the king his shirt, the scratch at the door. None of it was ancient tradition. Most of it was constructed within living memory by one man, a king who had been terrorized as a child by his own nobility, and who solved the problem of aristocratic rebellion not with prisons, but with choreography. Gather the dangerous men into one building, make the king's attention the only currency, and then invent 1,000 microscopic ways to earn and lose it, so that men whose grandfathers raised armies now spent their fortunes competing for stools. It worked for 100 years. It worked so well that the people inside it forgot it was a device. The way Baptiste's courtiers forgot, the way people always forget, until the code and the universe felt like the same thing. And here is the third thing, the one worth carrying to sleep. Every world has its scratch. Every human hive evolves its own soft signals for I know where I am, and its own quiet ruin for people who get them wrong. The fork order, the dress code, the way you're supposed to phrase the email, the laugh at the meeting that tells everyone who belongs. We're gentler about it now, mostly. Mostly. But the machinery is the same machinery, and if you have ever stood at the edge of a room full of people who all knew a rule you didn't, then you have stood in that antechamber with the Baron from the Rouergue, and you already understand Versailles better than the guidebooks do. The difference, the mercy of where you are right now, tonight, is that no one is watching you. The room you are lying in requires nothing. No bow, no nail, no signal, no rank. You could knock on your own wall as loud as you liked, and the only consequence will be feeling slightly silly. That is a luxury Louis XIV never had for a single day of his 72-year reign. Hold on to that thought. We'll come back to it at the end where it belongs. But first, Baptiste gets to grow old because he has earned it, and so have you. The years at the doors run together the way years do when the work is steady, and what stays with him. What he finds himself telling Madeleine at night in their 2 rooms with the practice door standing against the wall is never the great occasions. It is the texture, the particular ache in the balls of the feet after 8 hours of standing that no shoe ever solved, and the trick of shifting weight heel to toe so slowly no watcher could see it. A private tide. The winter mornings when the first task was breathing on the door latch to unfreeze his fingers to it. The exact feel of a well-hung state door coming off its rest. How 300 pounds of oak and gilt, properly balanced, moves at a fingertip's pressure, silent, floating, so that the whole art was not strength, but restraint, not pushing a door but permitting it. The sound of the palace at each hour, which he could tell blindfolded to the quarter. The broom hush of 7, the heel storm of 11 when the court flowed to mass. The deep after-supper hum like a hive settling. The 2 o'clock nothing with its single far-off watchman's tread. The smell of orange blossom hitting him on the threshold between the service world and the state world, 20 times a day for 40 years, until the 2 smells were less like smells than like the names of 2 countries he held passports to. And the hands. Ask him at 70 what he remembers, and he'll say hands. Tens of thousands of them, rising to tens of thousands of doors. The plump-ringed hand of a cardinal scratching exactly as softly as the chapped hand of a laundry girl at the linen room door, because the code, whatever else it was the one thing in France that everyone did in the same small voice. The shaking hand of a minister on the morning of his disgrace, scratching at the door that would not open for him. Baptiste stood post that morning, eyes at parade rest, and heard the man's breathing, and has never told anyone, and never will, because the discretion of ushers is the palace's deepest vault, and he is a vault to the end. The small determined hand of the boy king, 12 years old, freshly returned, pausing outside his dead great-grandfather's restored apartments one evening, Baptiste at the corridor's end, invisible wallpaper, and raising one finger and scratching once, softly, at a door with no one behind it, and waiting, and then going in alone. He never told anyone that either, until now. Some things you keep for the last audience, the one that's falling asleep. He leaves the king's service in 1741, 60 years old, with a pension, a warrant of honourable discharge, and a left little fingernail that he keeps. He tries, once, to let it grow out and trim it to match the others, to retire it, and finds he cannot. It feels like filing down his own name. And he and Madeline live on in the town in the shadow of the hill, where he can hear the chapel bells and see, on great nights, the glow of the state rooms over the rooftops like a lamp behind a curtain. Their daughter marries a clockmaker. Their son, to Baptiste's carefully concealed pride and completely unconcealed terror, is taken into the household, blue coat, north wing, and comes home on his rest days with his own left hand curled protectively against his chest, and complaints about his master usher's impossible standards, and Baptiste listens with his face perfectly composed, and his heart doing something entirely different, which is the most Versailles sentence in this whole story, and he knows it, and it makes him laugh alone in the garden. And on summer evenings, old, he sits by the practice door with his grandchildren, and they beg for the game, and the game is this. They close their eyes, and he scratches on the old worn paint, and they have to say who it is. A duchess. No, softer. A duchess in mourning. A minister in a hurry. A page at the end of the world. A boy from Normandy, 11 days at court, terrified, getting it wrong. A boy from Normandy, 3 years at court, getting it right. And the children never tire of it, and neither does he, because it is the truth and they don't know it yet, that he can play them his entire life on 2 inches of oak, softer than rain. There is one more evening worth living through before we let the dark have it, and it comes late, in Baptiste's 74th year, when his son arranges what old servants of the household are quietly entitled to, a last visit. He goes up the hill on a soft October afternoon, on his son's arm, slower on the cobbles than he'd like, and the town falls away behind them and the gates open. The gilded gates he first walked through at 15 with a bundle and a letter and a fist that didn't know yet what it must never do, and the Cour Royale receives him with its old smell of horses and stone, and then the palace takes him in the way it takes everyone, which is whole. The corridors have not changed. That is the thing that undoes him, gently, room by room. The court around him is a new court. New faces, new fashions, wider skirts, higher hair. A young king's noise where the old king's silence was. But the building underneath is the building. The same white and gold, the same leaning candle flames in the same river of draught, the same parquet giving the same particular creak at the same threshold on the north stair, and his feet remember the creak before his mind does, and step over it. 74 years old, stepping over a creak he learned at 15, and his son sees him do it and says nothing, and that silence is the best gift his son ever gives him. They stand a while in the hall of mirrors. It is late day. The 17 windows full of low gold light off the gardens, the 17 arches of glass holding their gold copy of it, tourists and courtiers and petitioners drifting through the brightness the way they always have, and Baptiste finds his own reflection far down the wall of mirrors, a small stooped man in good plain cloth, and thinks, there he is, still doesn't belong here, never did. Stood here anyway for 40 years. Both things true at once, all the way down, like the hall and its reflection. But it is not the hall of mirrors he has come for, and his son knows it. And they go on, up and along, into a gallery on the north side where the traffic thins, and they stop at a door. An ordinary door as doors go in this place, tall, white, gilded, one of hundreds, his first door. The one he held alone at 17 through the morning winter. The 1-2 corridors from the rooms where the future died in 11 days. The one where Obrio put a hand on his shoulder once, the only time. The light is low and comes along the wood at a rake, and so he can see it plainly beside the latch, hand high, the pale patch. Wider now, deeper. 40 more years of fingernail since his own, generations of hands he never met, all of them touching the same few square inches, humility wearing its little window in the paint. He stands in front of it for a long moment. His son waits. Somewhere down the gallery a door opens and closes on a gust of far-off music. Then Baptiste raises his left hand. The nail is still there, thin now, ridged with the age, absurd, faithful. And with nobody to hear it and nothing behind it he could name, he scratches. Once, downward, the length of his finger, firm enough to be heard by someone listening, gentle enough to mean what it always meant. I exist, barely. I was here. I knew exactly where I was. The sound is almost nothing. A whisper of keratin on paint, a mouse behind a wainscot. It goes into the wood with all the others. And then he takes his son's arm, and they go down and out through the courtyards into the October evening, and the palace stands behind them growing golden, and then grey and then dark, the way it does every single night whether anyone is watching or not. And that is the last time Baptiste Collin ever touches a door at Versailles, and it is enough, and he knows it is enough, and he sleeps that night the whole night through, which at 74 is its own kind of royal favour. Now it's late. Let the story settle where it wants to settle. You can let the great rooms go dark first. That's how the palace always did it. From the outside in, wing by wing, the candlemen moving down the galleries with their snuffers, each flame a small soft click of darkness, hundreds of them, thousands, until only the watchlights are left. Little islands down the long corridors, and the mirrors give up their gold and hold plain quiet night instead. Let the sounds go next. The last coach on the cobbles, the last door, closed by a hand trained never to let the latch click. The watchman's tread, further each round, the wind off the gardens crossing 2,000 dark windows, finding the same gaps it has found for 300 years. The fountains, silent, because no one is looking, and no one needs to look, and nothing needs to perform, not out there, and not here, and not you. You have no door to hold tonight, no post, no watch, no rank to read at 4 strides. Nobody is coming down your corridor. Nothing about you is being measured, not your hands, not your voice, not the length of anything. And whatever code the daylight world made you carry today, you can set it down now beside the bed the way Baptiste set down his lantern at the end of a round. Finished until tomorrow. And tomorrow is not your problem yet. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof and a bed and this one voice telling you an old true story in the dark. And that is more than most of the 10,000 souls of Versailles could say on any winter night of the reign. That's enough. It's more than enough. Centuries will pass. The palace Baptiste knew will empty and fill and empty again. A crowd will come up from Paris one October, and no court will ever live thereafter. The kings will end. The etiquette will end. The armies of candles will give way to lights no one has to tend, and the corridors where a knock could kill will fill with visitors from every country on earth, knocking on nothing, photographing everything, walking in an hour what he walked for 40 years, but the doors will still be there, some of the very same doors. And on a few of them, low and hand high, catching only a raking light, the pale patches will still be there too. The softest mark human beings ever left on a building, worn by nothing but fingernails and centuries, by every hand that ever rose and admitted for half a second exactly what it was. People don't change, not in the ways that matter for sleeping. They still learn the codes of their little worlds. They still stand outside doors with their hearts going hard. They still want, at the end of the day, the same three things Baptiste wanted in his attic under the slates: to be warm, to be safe, and to be allowed, finally, to stop performing. You're allowed. That's the whole of tonight's etiquette. One rule, and it's this: rest, so let it come. Let sleep take you the way the dark took the palace, wing by wing, one small soft click at a time. Let the corridors of the day go quiet behind you. Let your hands uncurl. Go on. Let them. They've held enough doors. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. And if somewhere at the very edge of sleep you hear something faint, softer than rain, softer than mice, a fingernail's whisper on old painted oak, you don't have to get up. You don't have to answer. It's only the past asking politely, the way it learned to ask. Let it wait till morning. Good night.